Well, the outgoing Biden administration is sure as hell bent on taking us into World War III. U.S.-backed al-Qaeda has taken over Syria, and it's entering a dangerous phase. Now Syria is collapsing in real time, thanks to the United States and Israel, of course, meddling in what was once one of the most peaceful countries in the world. Just a few years ago, it was one of the most peaceful countries in the world. That's what happens when you arm al-Qaeda, by the way, and then you try to foment a regime change in a country that is frankly none of our damn business. Of course, the mockingbird media in the United States right now, if you're reading any of the liberal press right now, the U.S. says these fighters are freedom fighters. So Americans need to get behind these rebels. This is an amazing narrative that they're spinning. Of course, that's a bald-faced lie. Moments ago, we just got reports from Syria that al-Nusra Front terrorists have now emptied out the prisons, unleashing chaos in the city of Aleppo. Syrian journalist and friend of the show, Kevork Almasian, reports that freed criminals are now running wild, looting homes, ransacking stores. He says the city is under siege by lawlessness at this moment. Joe Kent is a retired Green Beret combat veteran, Gold Star husband, ran for Congress, and has been outspoken about the need for the United States to get the hell out of here. What national security benefit do we have for having United States soldiers in Syria? And Joe joins us now. Joe, thanks for being a clear-headed champion for Americans to get the heck out of there. Thank you for what you're doing, and welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, man. Been listening to your program for quite a while. Thanks for what you do.
Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you. I mean, this is a murky situation, right? It's not black and white. But if you pick up the liberal media, if you pick up or watch, the CNN or read the New York Times, I mean, these terrorists, al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, whatever you want to call them, we've been funding, but now we're supposed to be labeling them as rebels, like they're freedom fighters. Can you believe this?
Yeah, I thought the American people were building up more of a awareness of just how frequently the media lies to us, just pattern recognition. But in the last, 72, 96 hours since Syria cropped back up into the headlines, we've seen this narrative of like these brave freedom fighter rebels are going and taking out the evil Assad against Russia and against Iran. And it all sounds very noble once again, but these rebels are nothing more than the rebrand of al-Qaeda and ISIS. Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham is, a former al-Qaeda affiliate. And so once again, we are supporting Syrian jihadists, Sunni jihadists against the Shia jihadists of Iran in order to affect some sort of a goal that no one can clearly define. It's just this never-ending cycle of proxy war. And again, we have Americans that are still in Syria. So this isn't just a proxy war that's far off somewhere. Americans are directly in harm's way, and we could be sucked into a wider war.
And we're there to protect their oil, because the Syrians need the United States to protect their oil. Like, have Americans not learned their lesson from these lies? So American soldiers being used as cannon fodder to protect Syria's oil, and then in the dark of night, bottle up that oil, put it in barrels, and send it to Iraq, right? That's how we protect Syria's oil, is to send it to Iraq. And I think, we had Congressman Matt Gaetz, of course, last year, who tried to propose legislation to get us out of Syria. There's no national benefit to us being in Syria. Do you agree with him, or do you disagree with him? By the way, it got voted down, so Congress still wants us there.
I 100% agree with him. I agreed with President Trump back in 2018 when he attempted to get our troops out of Syria the first time. I actually lost my late wife. She was also in the military. She was killed in January of 2019, a month after Trump tried to get our troops out the first time. President Trump did exactly what he said he was going to do in his first administration. He said he wanted to take out all the ground that ISIS controlled so that ISIS was no longer a major threat. But he also realized that if we continued to redefine and say, hey, we're over here to vaguely fight terrorism, that the mission would never end. So he did something that George Bush failed to do, that Obama failed to do. And he actually said, once all the ground that ISIS controls is taken away, we will get our troops out. And that's when you saw that the administrative state, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, really turn against President Trump to leave our troops there in Syria, because they want us chasing this vague objective. And now it's like very ironic that we once again are helping ISIS, these al-Qaeda affiliates and ISIS affiliates, control more ground in Syria, which basically will be a predicate for us to stay in Syria forever. It's the same thing. Now we have Americans that are doing so-called self-defense gun runs, air support, against these Iranian-backed militias, but these Iranian-backed militias come from Iraq. The government of Iraq is a government that we spend billions of dollars building up and protecting. So we basically are over there in this never-ending cycle of violence, and it could lead to a wider war with everything else that's happening right now in the Middle East, a wider war with Iran, which seems to be a fantasy that DC just cannot break. The permanent administrative state and the war machine in DC has always been obsessed with a regime change against Assad, but overall getting us sucked into a conflict with Iran. And at the end of the day, there's no real justification for this. There's no benefit to the American people whatsoever.
I love to hear you say that. And that's really at the core of my argument here, regardless of how you feel about Assad or Iran or whatever. There's no benefit at all to the United States in fomenting regime change, just like there wasn't in Iraq to foment regime change. There never is. There's never been a successful. Has there ever been, maybe you can clue me in here, has there ever been a successful regime change that the CIA has carried out, whether it was in Ukraine or Iraq or anywhere else, that's benefited the United States?
I really wish I could tell you that there was. I mean, I spent my entire adult life as a Green Beret. I was a CIA paramilitary operations officer. So I really wish I could look at you and be like, no, actually, there's a couple times where we got it right and it really benefited the American people. But I just got to be honest, like, it has not benefited the American people. Every time we try and play these games, in particular in the Middle East, where we support the Sunni jihadis against the Shia jihadis or vice versa, or we go after some sort of a boogeyman, strongman, every single time it blows up in our face and it makes things much worse. And nobody benefits. The American people don't benefit. The folks in the Middle East do not benefit. The only benefactor of these regime change wars is defense contractors along the Potomac. And so we've actually got to start putting the American people first and get ourselves out of these situations that do not benefit the security of our country.
And the Americans have been fed a steady diet of propaganda. You know, Americans are hardworking. They go to work every day to take care of their families. They come home. They get a little slice of news here and there if they get it from CNN or some other place. And they're led to believe these lies about chemical gas attacks that Assad carried out on his own people, widely debunked, of course. And all of this propaganda that's created, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in, whether it's in Libya, wherever it is. But Americans then have to, and they go along with this in order to line the pockets of these defense contractors. What sort of a pushback do you get? Because this is not a favorable position. You know, all of the neocons in Washington, all of the neocons that are swirling around Trump right now, trying to become part of his administration once again and trying to bring him down and keep us in these perpetual wars. When you speak out about this, what sort of pushback do you get from those people?
Well, you get a good deal of pushback. You get called everything from, a Putin supporter, because Putin is obviously supporting Assad, which I think at this point is almost a sideshow compared to everything else that's going on over there. So if you go against the narrative of the DC war machine, you're immediately called a Putin stooge. Most people know, if they read my resume, they can't question my loyalty to this country, but that doesn't stop people in the media from saying, hey, you're not being loyal. You're not on the team. Do you want Putin to win? And it's not as simple. Obviously, this is much more complicated than, do you want the good guys with the white hats and the bad guys with the black hats to win? But you'll immediately be smeared as a Putin propagandist or unloyal, or people will just say, hey, you're just bitter because of how things went in Iraq or something like that. But really, that's why I like to really just break down the facts and say, can someone please explain to me what the vital national security interest of the American government is here, and how do the American people benefit from this? And then a lot of it will fall back on the tired old, well, we have to fight them over there, so we don't fight them over here nonsense. But look, at the end of the day, I really like having these arguments and these discussions, because when you talk about the facts with most reasonable people, those just hardworking Americans that you talked about who only get a little slice of news, when you lay it out to them, their common sense takes over. There is a lot of just propaganda that comes from the media, but when we lay out the bare facts, I do think most people are actually with us. And this speaks, I think, really to the victory that President Trump just had, winning a sweeping victory. President Trump won in a landslide by speaking truth to power and really advocating for a more pragmatic and realistic American foreign policy. So I really hope that when he gets back in there, he surrounds himself with people like Tulsi Gabbard, with people like Pete Hegseth, who are veterans of these wars, who understand the costs of these wars and the ground truth. And he listens to them. Same thing with J.D. Vance. I mean, a global war on terror veteran, an Iraq war veteran himself, who was an enlisted guy fighting in Iraq. J.D. understands exactly what's going on here. And so I think having that realism brought into the White House, that just speaks to how, at the gut level, I think the American people understand that our foreign policy system is extremely broken and corrupt.
One of the taboo subjects is Israel, right, Joe? You can't talk about it, right? And so you can't have a conversation, in my mind, if you're being honest with people, you can't have a conversation about Syria. You can't have a conversation about Iran, Libya, regime change in Iraq without having the context of Israel, with Benjamin Netanyahu in front of the United States Congress calling for a regime change in Libya, calling for a regime change in Iran, calling for a regime change in Iraq. And like little stooges in Congress, they all just fall in line and move in this direction. And I've seen it around Syria as well. And the only country that seems to really benefit from a collapse of a regime in Syria would be Israel. Am I wrong about that?
There may be some sort of a temporary gain right there, because it would disrupt the way that Iran can resupply Hezbollah. However, in the long run, if Israel just takes a broad look at this, having jihadis, rabid jihadis on their doorstep does not benefit them whatsoever. Say what you will about Assad, but Assad is going to work in his own interests, and he is a secular ruler from a minority group within Syria. So if you look at it from a pragmatic Israeli standpoint, and I've worked with the Israelis before in my past line of work, most of them recognize that dealing with an Assad or dealing with someone like Saddam was much more practical than dealing with the instability that comes from regime change wars. So I think right now, in the heat of the moment, the Israelis may be very tempted to disrupt that Hezbollah supply line that's coming from the Iranians, coming from Damascus. But if they take a broader look and they look at just the overall history that we discussed of regime change wars and seeing how absolutely disastrous this was, just to think back 10 years ago, how chaotic and disastrous things were on their northern border when you had ISIS getting ready to take over large swaths of Syria, I think that they would really think again about supporting any of these jihadi groups. I'm not saying that they are one way or another, but I think that they would be very apprehensive about having that level of chaos on their border. And you've always got to be careful who you're making an alliance with for a temporary tactical gain. It may seem great right now. Oh, we're weakening Russia, we're weakening Iran, we're weakening Assad, so we'll do business with these jihadis. But at the end of the day, we know exactly who these jihadis are and how much of a threat they pose to America, to Israel, and really just to the civilized world altogether. So again, I think we'd be much better off having dialogue with the people that we can have dialogue with and avoiding the chaos.
And we've had generals on the show that would agree with you on that, which is Israel, by doing this, might be digging their own grave. So we'll see by attacking Damascus and otherwise. But yeah, this is an absolute hornet's nest at this moment, and praying for the people of Aleppo who are having their stores ransacked, their houses torn apart by what seems to be, once again, another CIA-engineered proxy war that the United States is deeply involved with. Joe, thank you for being a voice of reason in this sea of propaganda out there. Thank you for all of that. And where can people follow you on social media to get more of this enlightened commentary?
Yeah, I'm on X. It's Joe Kent 16 JAN19.
Awesome, Joe. Great to meet you, and thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.